Imagine a world where international laws clash with national security efforts, and a government shutdown leaves millions on the brink of hunger. Welcome to the chaotic headlines dominating US politics right now. As tensions rise, from military actions abroad to domestic crises at home, it's hard not to wonder, how far will leaders go to protect their agendas? Let's dive into these live updates that are shaking up the nation and beyond. First off, the United Nations. Top human rights advocate is sounding the alarm over the US military's aggressive moves against suspected drug trafficking vessels. Volker Turk, serving as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, issued a stark statement on Friday, labeling these strikes as clear violations of international law. For context, if you're new to this, international law sets global standards for how nations conduct military operations, especially to avoid unnecessary loss of life. Turk pointed out that since early September, these attacks have resulted in at least 61 deaths. Tragic figures that include not just smugglers, but potentially innocent bystanders on boats carrying drugs from South America. Such assaults, along with their escalating toll on human lives, simply cannot be tolerated, Turk declared in no uncertain terms, directly calling out the United States. He urged an immediate stop to these operations and demanded thorough investigations to prevent what he described as extrajudicial killings. Essentially, deaths outside a proper legal process, regardless of the crimes the targets are accused of. While the UN doesn't have the power to directly control a superpower like the US, which holds a permanent seat on the Security Council, this kind of outspoken rebuke adds fuel to the fire for critics, including Democrats and various advocacy organizations who see it as overreach by the Trump administration. President Trump himself greenlit these strikes, with his team informing Congress that the US is essentially at war with drug cartels, now officially branded as terrorist groups. But here's where it gets controversial. Experts on war laws and presidential authority argue there's scant legal groundwork for this approach, and little solid proof has been shared to back up the claims of an ongoing armed conflict. Turk's office echoed this, stating they found no reliable evidence that these boat incidents qualify as a true armed conflict under global rules. To make it clearer for beginners, think of armed conflict like a formal war declaration. It's not just any skirmish. It has strict criteria to prevent abuse. Back in early October, Turk penned a letter to US officials, emphasizing that fighting drug smuggling is primarily a police matter, not a military one. Lethal force should only come into play as an absolute last option, say when someone's life is in immediate danger. Based on the limited details released by US authorities, Turk noted that none of the people on those targeted boats seemed to present such an urgent threat, making the use of deadly force unjustifiable. And this is the part most people miss. While the administration pushes a tough-on-crime narrative, opponents question if this blurs the line between law enforcement and warfare, potentially setting a dangerous precedent for future operations. Shifting gears to the home front, the government shutdown is hitting where it hurts most: food security for vulnerable families. Without a sudden turnaround, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, better known as SNAP or food stamps, is projected to exhaust its funds by Saturday, November 1st. This program, a lifeline for low-income Americans since the 1960s, helps about 42 million people afford groceries each month. A federal judge in Massachusetts, Indira Talwani, is set to rule on Friday whether the Trump administration must keep the money flowing despite the shutdown stalemate. State leaders from 25 states plus DC are in a frenzy, suing the administration because they believe there's both a legal duty and an ethical imperative to avoid cutting off benefits. During a heated call session on Thursday, Judge Talwani seems skeptical of the government's excuses about legal barriers, technical glitches, or budget constraints, preventing them from dipping into SNAP's emergency reserves. Billions set aside precisely for crises like this. Congress allocated funds for emergencies, she remarked, adding, "It's baffling how this isn't one, with no cash left and so many relying on these benefits to eat." For those unfamiliar, SNAP averages about $187 per person monthly, totaling around $8 billion a month nationwide, vital in staving off hunger, especially in tough economic times. But the uncertainty lingers. Even if the judge sides against the administration, payouts might be delayed or reduced by half for November, and an appeal from the Justice Department could drag things out further. The White House stays silent on queries, but top officials like Vice President J.D. Vance have downplayed their role, claiming Trump has done all he can to soften the blow. Vance warned Thursday that the pain is already real and will intensify, potentially devastating the nation's poorest communities. Some states are scrambling to cover benefits temporarily with their own funds, but that's a short-term fix at best. Maybe a week or two for places like Arizona, California, and New York. This reversal on using reserves is particularly galling. The Agriculture Department had initially promised to tap the $5 billion pot if the shutdown persisted, but late October brought a U-turn, limiting it to natural disasters only. Lawsuits are piling up, including one from cities and non-profits calling it a needless crisis, with a Rhode Island court hearing that on Friday too. Lawyer Michelle Pascucci, representing Massachusetts and others, told the judge the stakes are sky high. Generations of Americans could lose this essential support overnight. Senator Patty Murray, a key Democrat, blasted it as a cruel twist, noting funds exist, but the choice is to let people starve. But here's a counterpoint to ponder. Is the administration's stance a principled stand on legal limits, or just political maneuvering amid the shutdown fight? In a bold escalation, President Trump took to Truth Social late Thursday, urging Senate Republicans to scrap the filibuster rule altogether to ram through an end to the shutdown. For beginners, the filibuster is a Senate tradition, allowing the minority party to delay or block votes by demanding 60 votes instead of a simple majority. It's been a cornerstone of bipartisan checks for over a century. With Republicans holding 53 seats, Trump called it their Trump card moment to bypass Democratic holds on funding bills, which are tied to demands for reinstating Affordable Care Act subsidies. GOP leaders, like Majority Leader John Thune, have brushed off the idea before, wary of the nuclear option that could boomerang if Democrats flip the chamber. Both sides have chipped away at the rule for things like judicial nominees, but full elimination? That's a line few want to cross. As anti-poverty aid teeters and health insurance shoppers face subsidy cliffs and price hikes, Trump's push highlights the shutdown's broad fallout. And this is where it gets controversial. Ditching the filibuster might speed up resolutions now, but could it erode democracy's safeguards long-term, letting whichever party holds power bulldoze opposition? The shutdown's ripples are even grounding flights. Air traffic control shortages led to major headaches Thursday, with Orlando International Airport hit hardest. No landings for hours due to zero available certified controllers, causing average delays of 2 hours 40 minutes, some stretching to nearly 12 hours, and outright cancellations. New York's JFK saw ground stops for staffing woes atop storm disruptions, while DC's Reagan National dealt with afternoon backups. Vice President Vance and Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy warned of a looming disaster if this drags into November, especially with holidays and winter weather ramping up demands on an already strained workforce of 14,000, short about 3,000 positions. Controllers skipped their first paycheck Tuesday, and Duffy noted many can weather one miss but not two, exacerbating pre-existing overtime burnout. Yet Duffy spun it positively. These managed delays prove the system's safety nets are working, prioritizing safe workloads over speed. Still, for travelers, it's a stark reminder of how federal furloughs cascade into everyday chaos. Finally, in a legal showdown, former FBI Director James Comey is fighting back against perjury and obstruction charges, with fresh court motions filed Thursday in Virginia. His team argues prosecutors mangled the indictment by abusing grand jury procedures and pinning a lie on him that never happened. Comey, a vocal Trump foe, faces these under unusual drama. Trump fired a hesitant U.S. attorney and slotted in loyalist Lindsay Halligan, who nabbed the indictment on day 4 of her gig. Prior briefs slammed it as revenge, but now they target the indictment's flaws, seeking dismissal and a detailed bill of particulars. To flesh out the vague charges, the 2-page document claims Comey misled a 2020 Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on the Crossfire hurricane probe into Trump-Russia links. Specifically, Senator Ted Cruz asked if Comey authorized FBI leaks to media as anonymous sources. The indictment says his denial was false. Comey's lawyers counter that Cruz's query was vague, likely about Deputy Andrew McCabe, not the actual focus, ex-FBI consultant Daniel Richman. Plus, Comey's short reply that he stood by prior testimony was technically true, they say, dodging perjury which needs clear lies to clear questions. No false statements without precise queries and deceitful replies. Neither applies here, they asserted. For clarity, perjury is lying under oath, a serious felony, but truthfulness hinges on context. The second motion blasts Halligan, Trump ex-lawyer and insurance vet with zero prosecution experience, for grand jury blunders, overworking jurors past hours, signing conflicting indictments, and possibly leaking privileged info via an FBI witness. They call it severely irregular, rare for a newbie to solo such a high-stakes presentation without oversight. Prosecutors from North Carolina will rebut in weeks, with a November 13 hearing on Halligan's appointment. Joined by New York AG Letitia James's similar challenge before a South Carolina judge. What a whirlwind of policy clashes, legal battles, and human stakes. These stories spotlight deep divides, from global human rights to domestic aid, and power plays in Congress and courts. But do you think ending the filibuster is a necessary evil or a democratic disaster waiting to happen? Or is the UN's stance on US strikes too idealistic in the face of drug wars? Share your takes in the comments. Agree, disagree, or add your spin. Let's keep the conversation going.